Welcome back to the No Gray Areas podcast. Today we have my lifelong friend of 38 years, author, TED Talk speaker, Brandon Smith. We tackle a vulnerable conversation on insecurity, imposter syndrome, practical tips for work-life balance. Plus, Brandon shares what he believes is the secret to happiness. Let's get started. Brandon Smith, welcome to the No Gray Areas podcast. We were talking before we turned this on. We've known each other for how long?
I'm going to go 38 years, 38 years.
Yeah. Which means you're how old now?
I'm 41.
So
4
do the
years
math,
old, 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah, you were 4 or 5 years old. And so it's kind of cool for me sitting here because I knew you at 4 or 5 years old. And then I ended up teaching and coaching you in junior high. I taught and coached you in high school. And then I got to watch you like go from being a little boy to a young man, to a father, to a husband, seeing your career path go. It's just really fun. That's one of the fun things about getting old, like I am now, to see guys like you growing up.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I've had this date circled on my calendar, I think, for almost 6 months now. I think last December we talked about recording and getting together. And it's funny, from my perspective, from my seat, the last 40 years, I've watched a high schooler become a man and become a teacher and become a coach and go into ministry and now host a podcast. And, you know, it's always interesting. You never know when you have a relationship, if it's, I was just recently telling my kids this, if it's a seasonal relationship or a lifelong relationship. And you don't know until the season's over what it was. And
that's so true, because most are seasonal, right? And that was one of the hard things for me to understand when I was younger, because I wanted every relationship to be lifelong relationships, but most are seasonal.
Yeah, and I struggle with that. I'm very nostalgic. Like I want to hold on to the good old days so bad, so bad. I live in them daily.
Yeah,
and so it's just crazy that here we are, 2024, and realize relationship with you is a lifelong relationship.
My kids make fun of me a lot of times because we'll be driving down the road sometimes and a song will come on. And I'll be up there like crying like a little girl. And they're going, "What's wrong, Dad?" And I'm like, "I'm just remembering when you guys were kids." So I'm very nostalgic.
A song comes on and like the smells come back, like where you were driving on the highway, just instantly.
It's true.
Takes you back.
It's true. In fact, I asked my wife the other day, I said, so I'm going to ask you this question. This is an interesting question. I said, what percentage of time do you live in the past, present, or future? Because I'm trying to get better at living in the moment, you know, is what I just prayed before we turned on our mics, right? To live in the moment. Like this is the only day we're guaranteed. Yesterday's gone, tomorrow's not guaranteed. But for me, I spend most of my time in the future and the past and very little time in the present. I try to get better. I asked my wife that question. She goes, I spend almost all my time in the present. I'm like, what?
How weird is she?
What about you? What would you say?
It's a great question. I struggle with both. The past, I feel like so much of it identifies me and defines who I am, and I'm forced to live inside this framework that others have placed me inside this box. At the same time, I'm a dreamer. I'm optimistic. I see the future. But the irony of this question is right now I'm working on a presentation. Actually, I'm speaking at TED Talk later this year. Yeah. And the topic, my idea is, what if the secret to happiness was simply being present? And I'm trying to debunk this idea,
goosebumps, dude.
The
That's
idea
so
of work-life balance.
Yeah.
Like we've tried so hard to perfectly split the pie or figure out what hat we're wearing at which time. But what if we just, we all, I'm going to just go off on this.
Yeah, do it.
Most people enter their industry for two main reasons: earning capacity and lifestyle. Yet everybody I talk to is busier than they've ever been and still not satisfied with the results. So something's got to change. And I think that's how we live our life, how we have to live an intentional life and learn what matters most to us. And then we have to learn how to protect what matters most. And then we have to have a calendar that reflects what matters most. And, I hear people all the time saying, I wish I had more time for a date night with my wife, or I wish I could go to the gym and work out. I just don't have time. But they're current on binge watching The Bachelor, or their fantasy football roster is up to date, and they're out of balance. And how many times are we in conversations with our kids while we're scrolling on our phone and we're not even present with our own kids? And so this whole idea of work-life balance, I think is one, it doesn't work. We don't know what balance is. And if we're balancing the wrong things, it's not going to work. And secondly, work-life balance assumes this idea that work and life are two opposing forces in constant battle with each other. And I'm at the office thinking about, I got to mow the lawn when I get home. And then I'm mowing the lawn and thinking about that meeting tomorrow. And no, we have one life. So
Yep.
let's be present and know that what's in front of us right now is the most important part of our day, and make sure that our calendar
Yeah.
reflects. And so
Yeah.
it's a long answer to your question. I am trying and striving to practice what I preach and live in the now, live in the present.
Oh man, that's so perfect, Brandon, because the older I get, the more I realize how important that is. And you're probably going to start hitting this as you're working through your 40s. The reality that you have less runway in front of you. I mean, we never know. You could die tomorrow, but most likely, let's say you
I'm
lived
41. I felt something in my leg today and thought, is this it? This is how it ends?
Yeah, well, you'll start feeling a lot of those as you get older. 40s especially. Good luck with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, getting old is for the brave.
Yeah.
It takes some courage. But all that to say is, I get older, the reality that there's less runway in front of me makes me all the more want to really live in the moment, like soak it up, like not be so much, because I was always so goal oriented. I'm going to take that mountain, and I get to the top of that one. Then it's what's the next mountain? What's the next mountain? And so I was always about the destination, not the journey. And I'm trying to get a lot better at the journey, which is kind of what you're saying your TED Talk that you're putting together is about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Say again, what's the core of it?
What if the secret to happiness? And I'm not sure, I'm not married to the word happiness yet, but the idea is, what if the secret to happiness is simply being present?
Mm-hmm. Philosophers have talked about that for a long time, and theologians have talked about that for a long time, I think. So, I really like that, because, again, I do think that we are either living in the past or the future, very, very little in the present. And you brought something else up that my wife and I have talked about recently, work-life balance. I just, in the last couple of weeks, her and I were sitting in the morning, sitting outside, and we were having coffee together, and I said, I don't even know if I like that phrase work-life balance anymore. I don't think for most of human history that was something that they talked about.
Right.
Like, work was just part of life. Like, you worked. And I think that probably came from the industrial age, would be my guess, where people actually started going to work. Like, I go to work at 8 a.m, I get off at 4. But for most of human history, your job, whatever you did, like if you were a farmer, you just farmed.
Right.
You didn't
And
do
it was
from 8 to
seasonal.
5
There
or
were
8 to 4,
seasons.
and there was,
you got up with the sun and went to bed with the sun.
Yeah. And harvest time, you were maybe working 16-hour days, and then there were other times where you maybe worked less.
So I wonder if this idea of work-life balance isn't something we do, but it's something we feel. It's an internal, there's this peace when your life's in balance. When you're out of balance, there's this tension that you're continually juggling, and it takes work. You work really hard to try to maintain balance.
So you're saying it's something we feel?
What if it's a feeling?
Yeah.
Just,
yeah.
That's balance.
Yeah. Yeah.
You think clearer. You're more intentional. Like this idea, like, we're working so hard and we're working so fast to go and achieve and reach these goals, that when we are in a hurry, it's interesting that the word hurry has the same root as the word hurdle and hurricane. And you think about when you're in a hurry, what's going on inside of you is this storm. It's this tropical storm and these objections you have to overcome. And when we are in a hurry, we are the worst version of ourselves. We have a short temper. We snap at the people we love the most. We're trying to achieve these goals, yet we're short with our children and our wives because we're in a hurry. And what if we can just slow down? And then I think we could take it and purely go and look at the Bible. And it's rare that you ever see Jesus in a hurry. There were moments where, Mark talks about immediately he healed someone, but he walked everywhere he went. He lived life at a pace of 3 miles an hour. And he accomplished way more than I've even dreamt.
And if there was ever a person that lived on this planet that had a reason to be in a hurry, it would have been him.
Right.
And yet we don't see that very often with him.
He knew his runway was short.
Yeah. Yeah. Shorter than ours. Yeah.
And he got a lot done.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that's a great point. I do think that we get so rushed. In fact, I heard a psychologist recently, and he was talking about how perhaps our modern day culture, we have less margin in our life than ever before. And that's part of what you're talking about with hurry, I think.
Yep.
That, like, the reason that when you read a book, the reason it has margins is because our eyes, if they filled the pages from edge to edge, our eyes just can't handle it. We wouldn't be able to read the page very well. So they purposely put in margin. Well, I think it's the same with our life. When we don't have margin in our life, we're always just rush. We aren't the best versions of ourselves, as you said. So that's good. I can't wait to hear this TED Talk.
And now people are beginning to ask me, like, okay, so practically, how do you live this out? What's that actually look like? And that's where it takes discipline and becomes difficult. And so, a couple of things I like to do, like our youngest daughter, she's in that tension now. Is she still a little girl or is she a teen? Like there's one day, she wants to play Barbies, and the next day she wants to talk about starting her own business.
Yep.
But you may have experienced this with your children, Pat. Like, My daughter Harper will come up to me and say, Dad, will you play Barbies with me? Will you play dolls with me? And I'll say, absolutely, honey. Just let me finish up this email. As soon as I get this sent, we'll play. And I'm working on that email. And as I hit send, I see another email come in and I read that and realize I need to reply to that. And then as my daughter's waiting for me, I hear my wife tell the family, hey, dinner's ready. It's time to eat. We go eat dinner. The rest of the night takes off. We have other events or activities. My intentions were to play dolls with my daughter, and I didn't.
Yeah.
So now when my daughter says, Dad, will you play with me? Absolutely, honey. Let's look at the calendar. You know what? Thursday night, 7:00 is wide open. I'm putting it in the calendar. I'm making an appointment with you. I'm going to show up. I'm going to be present. I'm not going to be distracted. And it may sound legalistic, but I had to create a framework that helped me get what I want out of life. And now Harper, all week, Dad, are we still on for Thursday? She's looking forward to it. There's anticipation. And then when I show up, there's no distraction. I'm there. I'm present. And then I've tried to do the same. You know, we follow each other on social media. I'm active. I post a lot. But scrolling consumes us. It takes our time.
Absolutely.
And so I actually put in my calendar 2 time blocks throughout the week
that you're
to scroll social media.
Yeah.
Like I want to like, share, comment, engage, build relationships, learn, be educated. But if I block out a 45-minute time on Friday morning or Tuesday afternoon where I treat it as another business appointment, it's actually healthy and beneficial rather than the doom and gloom of social media is destroying our society. No, it's an amazing tool where you can stay connected with people. And so those are just 2 practical ways where I'm trying to figure out, hey, how do I be present but still get done what needs to get done?
I like what you just said, because I do think that we've done that through human history. We always do that. Whatever's new, the new technology, so the internet was going to destroy humanity. Social media is destroying humanity. And we actually have proof that it is not healthy in a lot of ways. But what's so great about it is like you and me. I've known you since you were 4 or 5 years old, and we're staying in contact in a way that we never would have been able to in any other time of human history. But you're finding out a way, a practical way that you're actually putting that into your calendar, not letting it consume you, not letting it actually become something that is taking away from other things. And
I'm so type A, so driven that I live by my calendar. If it's my calendar, it's important. I have to do it. And so there'll be seasons where I'll, Monday through Thursday night, I'll put it 10:00 in my calendar, bed. Because if I don't go to bed, if I don't have an appointment to go to bed, I will stay up late. Yeah. And that will negatively impact my 7:00 appointment the next morning. Yeah. Those people deserve the best version of me, not the tired, exhausted because I was up late binge watching Netflix.
Yeah.
So I try to put everything in my calendar. And then a few minutes ago, you said margin. We got to schedule room for margin. Life happens. You need to be able to take a 15 Simon Sinek says it best. You cannot schedule when you're going to have a good idea or when you're going to need to take a break. So create margin in your life. Schedule margin. Yep. Allow time to just sit, get up from your desk and go walk for 10 minutes. Yep. Like create margin.
Well, and I think anybody that has to do any kind of creative content, creating things, you have to as a speaker. A lot of our listeners have to in some way. If you're not creating that margin, like that's where some of your best ideas come. You think it's coming because you're sitting in a room with a whiteboard and 4 other people. But for me, my way, other people have theirs. But when I go take a hike out in the desert, there's something that happens. All of a sudden, my mind starts coming up with great ideas. And that's margin. That's like I'm just hiking. It's not, how would you call that work? Right. But there's some great ideas that come at that.
It's the same. For me, I'm in the sauna. I try to get in the sauna every day.
Yeah.
There's no phones. There's no books. There's no light. It's just
You could bring a phone in there, they'll burn your hand off.
It will burn your hand, it'll overheat. But just a place to clear your head and just decompress or think about the future, innovate, strategize. And then the problem is you come out of there and you have all these ideas and nowhere to write them down. And later in the day, you forget, what was that?
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Well, let's transition then. This is actually a perfect time to transition. Hey, we hope you've enjoyed this episode so far. Be sure to like and subscribe to not miss a future podcast. Okay, let's get back to the episode. One of the things that we wanted to talk about was identity. And you brought that up a little bit. You actually mentioned the word identity earlier. The reason that we want to talk about identity is this podcast is really around the power and complexity of human choice, that we make our choices and eventually our choices make us. But every single listener deals with their identity issues. In fact, a counselor once told me that I had preached a sermon on identity once, our identity in Christ. And a counselor came up to me and said, almost everybody I have in my office, the core issue that they're really dealing with is identity issues. Well, because you and me happen to be the same personality types on the Enneagram. Listeners, if you've never taken the Enneagram test, I highly recommend it. It's a personality test, been around for hundreds of years. It's kind of coming back. But we're both threes. And for the audience, threes, significance is important for us. If you ain't winning, you're sinning. That's kind of the way you sum up how threes think about life. The danger, the shadow side of threes, Brandon and I are threes. We get a lot done. We accomplish things because significance is all about significance. But the shadow side is we can wear masks, that we hate failure. We don't do well with failure, even though failure is part of life. And so with a lot of relationships, we put on masks. That's the danger for threes, right? So you and I, over the last few years, and we've met for coffee now and then, this comes up often, and we talk about our journey in our lives with trying to have a healthier sense of identity. So I want you just to break down a little bit your journey with that, how you're doing better, practical tools that you found, where you still struggle with it in the next 30 seconds.
I don't even know where to start. I love that we've gotten to the place where we can self-deprecate and make fun of ourselves, being a three.
Yep.
I've read the books. I've read all the Enneagram. I'm well-versed, but head knowledge doesn't mean anything. It's behavior-based, and when you internalize, it's got to drop from your head to your heart. And what really helped me cross over was actually saw an interview with Oprah, where at the end of her career, the end of her show, the Oprah show had gone away. She was being interviewed. And one of the questions was, what was a common theme you saw over the years you didn't expect from all of your guests? You've had celebrities, you've had royalty, you've had Princess Diana, Queen Elizabeth, you've had Michael Jordan.
That's a great question.
You've had Dan Rather, all these household names for decades.
Tom Cruise jumping up and down on the couch.
On the couch. Richard Simmons. She's had it all.
Yeah, that's true.
And she immediately knew the answer. She goes, what's amazing is it doesn't matter anybody's status, title, or accolades. When the studio shuts down, the lights are off, it's quiet, and we're just backstage visiting after recording. Does not matter who the guest was. They always ask the question, hey, was that all right? Is that what you were looking for? And she goes, the insecurity in humanity is real.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, every single one of my guests, from the Queen of England to Tom Cruise, just wanted to be good enough.
Yeah.
And I realized, Oprah, I may not agree with you on very much, but I agree with you there. That's me. I just want to be accepted. And I started looking back at my life and seeing different moments in sports. And you may recall this moment. My junior year of high school, we were playing our crosstown rivals. We were the Christians and the Catholics, Valley Christian against Loyola. We were up 18 points going into the fourth quarter at home. And with 3.2 seconds left, we're down by 1.
Mm-hmm.
We run an inbounds play that falls apart, and somehow the ball ends up in my hands just off the elbow of the free throw line. I shoot, the ball rims out, we lose the game. Go into the locker room, I take off my Adidas Superstar shoe, take it off, and I throw it at the concrete as hard as I can. I'm guessing there's probably still an imprint of that shoe, the anger and fire inside of me. And for years, I justified that response as this, I'm just competitive. I hate losing. It's all that. And in fact, I come out of the locker room after the game, and I remember my dad being just, oh, you almost got him. You almost made it. That would have been it was all about that. And the truth is, Pat, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was my value and self-worth.
Your value was.
If I would have made that shot, I would have been found lovable. I would have had purpose. People would have wanted me. People wanted to have been close to me. They would have wanted to interview me and post my picture in the newspaper, and my own parents would have hugged me and embraced me. But even my parents went to, you weren't good enough. Oh, you almost made it. It was an identity crisis for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I started seeing that happen over and over throughout my life. Looking back from Little League Baseball at 12 years old to marriage, relationships, that if there was any sense of rejection or abandonment towards me, I couldn't handle it. And I always justified my responses. It's just,
you're competitive. Yep. Man, that's where we resonate so well with each other. In fact, Brandon, I was doing some, just kind of digging into my responses to life like you did with that event. And I went way back to the playground. I was going where did I start picking up this idea that my value came from my winning, if you will? or
Or
succeeding
performance.
or performance.
Performance-based, yeah.
And I realized that there were some negative times, but then even the positive times. So, growing up in rural Montana, I was a above average athlete with the people. Now, again, worldwide, I'm nothing. But when you're talking about more of a rural, when we'd go out to recess, I was maybe one of the better athletes out there. So when we would pick teams, I
You
was
had
one of the
3
first ones
kids in your
picked.
class.
Yeah, we had 17 in the
Okay.
class. Yeah, but I look back and I go, I didn't realize it at the time, but when I was getting picked first for the football team at recess, I was starting to create my identity around, oh, it matters if I'm good at something.
Yeah.
Like if I was picked last, well, that would be terrible. But again, I'm tying my identity to whether I'm successful or not successful, as you did when you were a junior in high school. Which, by the way, thanks for bringing up that game again.
Yeah, do you
because
remember
I,
that?
I forgot that I didn't know that it was you that
It was
did make
me.
the shot.
It was me.
I do remember the game where we lost almost a 20-point lead in the fourth quarter to our crosstown rivals.
Yeah.
Yes, and yeah, for me, one of the games that keeps me awake was your brother actually played on the team. You'd already graduated from high school, was soccer, and we went undefeated that year, and we went to the state championship.
I was at that game. Kalispell, Montana.
Play the team that we had beat twice. We're in the state championship. We hadn't lost a game all season, and we lose in double overtime.
Yeah.
I still lay in bed and think about that. But I'm still working through like, okay, but this is I always wondered what it would be like to go out and you hadn't lost a game all season and you win the state championship. I actually don't know what that feels like, and I never will know.
Yeah.
But somehow I look back and go, my significance was unhealthily tied to that.
Well, Pat, here's the problem. I just laid out for you the head knowledge, like we know what it is in our core and how we need to operate. And even in the last couple of weeks, I've had failures or not getting the engagement or something I wanted. And I go, I don't tell anybody because I feel like I still battle it every single day.
Yeah. And I think you and I will, like all humans, all of our listeners will struggle with this somewhat. Personality type, I think, plays into it even more. And that's why I brought up the fact that we're 3s,
Right.
because that's the unhealthy part of me. There's a lot of good things about being a 3 too, but the unhealthy thing is we tie our significance to that. So I don't know that we'll ever arrive in this life probably
Yeah.
of overcoming that. But what was some of the things that caused you to start digging in and wrestling with or recognizing the unhealthy side of that for you?
That's such a loaded question that I have 2 answers to that. The shallower answer is I just started realizing that who I was in public wasn't who I was behind closed doors, and not in a lack of integrity or integral way. I had just painted a picture that I was better than I really was, that I achieved because people would find me more valuable or lovable if I had accomplished X, Y, or Z.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem like a shallow answer, by the way. That seems pretty deep.
So here's one for you. I had this dream growing up of playing Little League baseball or playing Major League Baseball or just honestly professional sports in general. But when I was younger, it was baseball, playing Little League, and then through high school played basketball and then played a little bit of college basketball. Tore my ACL and thought my dream of ever playing basketball professionally, whether it was overseas or wherever, was done. I'm going to play baseball. I'm going to go back to baseball. And so I reached out to different organizations trying to figure out how to get an opportunity to try to play. And I happened to get I would say invite, but it was kind of open to the general public, a invitation to a workout combine for the Arizona Diamondbacks. And so I went to that and competed throughout the day and then never got a call back. And so it really ended. But inside of me, it was, I got a call and tried out for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Well, it was open. But where I realized it was when I was coaching my son's Little League team and talking about my background in baseball, how I just threw in there. And then I tried out for the Arizona Diamondbacks and didn't make it, was I want these little boys to value me and think I'm something I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had somebody approach me and be like, you told the boys this? And did you really? Like, so my words were accurate, but the picture I was painting was more of I want them to like me, value me.
Yeah.
And that
Be
was several years
because
ago.
because, again, this is where your value as a person goes up in your mind. This isn't right, but your value as a person goes up if it's the story that you were telling versus the story that it really happened.
Right.
But that's the lie we tell ourselves,
Right.
right? That's the danger.
And then
of
you
it.
tell yourself a lie enough that it becomes truth,
Yeah.
and you can't figure
Yeah.
out, wait, what really did happen?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with me? And then you get into the cycle of, wait, I'm a liar, I'm a fake, I'm a fraud, I have no value, I'm not going to be lovable. I have to do something quick to shift the attention back to
Yeah.
something that people need
Yeah.
inside of me.
Well, you said that there was two things you were going to talk about. One of them you said was the shallow,
Yeah, I
which
think it's
didn't seem shallow at all. So this better be really deep.
Yeah.
because
So number two, I mean, honestly, had a marriage fail,
Mm.
and walked through a very ugly public divorce. And a lot of that came from this personality trait where I had to go into some therapy and meet with counselors and self-reflection of why am I the way I am. And it takes two. So I'm not at all pointing the blame at her or the past. But there were things that my response to situations were out of this, if she would push me, I would push back in an effort. I had a counselor explain to me the way I operated was kind of like the Disney movie Tarzan. That inside of Brandon, there's this little Tarzan who loves the chase. You're chasing after me. But when you're not chasing, I have to do something to create the chase. And I want you to get close. But as soon as you get close to me, I take off running again, because if you get too close, you might know the real me and see that I'm not.
You're going to see the brokenness.
The brokenness.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't even know that in marriage I was even the real me, because I would hide those deep, dark, vulnerable fears, which were rejection and abandonment. And the irony of it all was getting served papers and being rejected and abandoned.
Yeah.
My greatest fear happened to me. And so hitting rock bottom created I got to figure. And what's funny is the timing of it, I was so anti the whole Enneagram. I thought it was like, this is just another marketing. Yeah. We're going to define and put labels on everyone and market it. And great idea. It's a horoscope for Christians.
Yeah.
But then on the other side of that season of life, just with therapy and counseling, that's when I discovered my personality, my traits, those shadows. And it was just opened up a whole new world to me. And so I think our greatest strength is often our greatest weakness.
Absolutely.
And so taking that weakness, I became driven and motivated to go fix myself, figure me out.
Yeah.
And it propelled me to where I am today.
Yeah. So how are you working through that today then?
It's a battle every day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's some days that feel great and there's other days where I'm just like, who am I? I'm like imposter syndrome. Like, am I even real? Am I fooling myself?
Well, and that's a key term. The term you just used, I guarantee you, and I think you would agree with me on this, there's not a single listener right now. If they're driving on the road listening to this podcast in their car, or they're sitting at home, or they're working at home and they're listening to this, when we say imposter syndrome, if they were honest with themselves, they'd be like, oh man, I struggle with that. I think all humanity struggles with that in a huge way, right? Like, I don't belong. Like you were using an example of Oprah, where Oprah's saying at the end of it, doesn't matter if it was Tom Cruise or the Rock Dwayne Johnson who she interviewed, when they go backstage, there's still, did I do okay?
Yeah.
Right? Because there's this imposter syndrome. And I think that there's all kinds of areas that come from, but certainly one of the things that's dangerous for us is our self-talk, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Like, if there's a way to mute myself, I think I would be a healthier, better version of myself. Going back to the TED Talk, for me, being a public speaker and traveling and speaking, I've been on large stages, small stages, round stages, squares. I've been on all the stages. But for me, the achievement, the bucket list was TED Talk. That was a big platform. And as soon as I got the call, that I was accepted, thousands of applications. They took 14 speakers. I made it. Immediately, I thought, I'm a fraud. I have no business being on the TED Talk. What am I going to do? Like, I'm never nervous to be on stage, but all of a sudden I'm nervous. I'm not qualified. I can't do this. And I'm already going through people are going to wonder, did you pay someone? How did you get there? Like, you must know someone. They didn't have a lot of, I find myself daily trying to tell myself to shut up. No, you've worked really hard for the last 20 years to create content, to define or to refine your speaking abilities, to engage with audience. Like, no, this is what you've been working for. And I won't let myself accept it.
Brandon, one of the things that a friend of mine recently told me, because I was telling him, I was being transparent with him just about my imposter syndrome, just going like, man, sometimes I wonder, like, why am I at that table? And he made this statement. We're both men of faith. He goes, you're at the table because God put you there. So I think of that. I say that as encouragement to you with the TED.
So help me with that. We're flipping roles. I'm interviewing you now.
Yeah.
How do you get that?
We were joking about that.
How do you get that from your head to your heart? How do you live that? And actually just the confidence of God put me here without second guessing.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, I don't know that we'll ever arrive where we'll wake up someday and not struggle with that. I think that's a human issue. But I think our self-talk is a huge one, that if people will pay attention, I don't think most of our listeners, me included, it's just been the last few years where I started to really pay attention to my self-talk. Like you just said, if I could mute my self-talk, I think I'd be a way healthier person. I've been paying more attention to the self-talk. I didn't used to think, all of a sudden now I'm going like, wait, why was I just thinking that, whatever, fill in the blank? Where before, I don't even think I would have paid attention to the fact that, because you're not verbally saying it out loud to yourself, it's in your head. So I encourage our audience, really listen to what you're telling yourself. And I actually think that most of the time you would never think to saying some of the stuff we say to ourselves to our worst enemies. But we say it to ourselves and to pay attention to it. So for me, you're asking me how I'm doing it. I think I'm just trying to pay attention a little bit more. I actually have a routine now. I don't do it every single day, but I stand up and I look in the mirror and I just quote some things that are truths that I'm going to get to in a little bit here with you, but some truths I think are from God for our identities, that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, that I'm in the situation I'm at right now because God put me there.
Isn't that incredibly difficult to look yourself in the eye and speak positively towards yourself? Like, it is really uncomfortable at first.
Well, and you bring up a powerful point. So what I just said I do, I would encourage our audience, don't just say those things. You got to stand in front of a mirror because it is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you look at yourself in the eye and you say those things. Because the funny thing is I'm Mr. Encourager. I love to encourage people. I encourage other people all the time. And I rarely have my own self-talk like that. Mine is usually negative. So, by the way, great job on flipping the...
Thank you.
Yeah. Brandon, by the way, audience, Brandon has his own podcast. We'll get to that a little bit later too, but we were joking about it before that you're going to have to answer the questions, not ask the questions on this one. So let me ask you a couple of questions about identity. These are a couple of quotes.
Okay.
And I'm going to read the quote and I want you to just give your thoughts about it. First of all, you brought up the term before about insecurity, which I think an unhealthy identity and insecurity are like twins. They're tied together. So here's one of the quotes. Insecurity is not about ego, but insecurity is about where your identity is. What are your thoughts on that? It's not about ego, it's about where your identity is.
Read it one more time.
Insecurity is not about ego. We usually think it's about ego. But insecurity is about where your identity is.
I think a great thought on that is, actually I've pulled up here a tweet of yours, January 2nd, 2017. I have screenshot it, I've shared it, I retweet it once a year. If your past dictates your present, then it's not really your past. And you've said that over and over. Like that's like your tombstone quote when I think of you.
Yeah.
And so I think if our past is still dictating our present, we have an identity issue.
Yeah.
I think the word,
So true.
I don't know if it's regional, but I feel like the word narcissism and narcissistic is at an all-time high. Everybody uses it and everybody accuses everyone of being narcissistic. And when I go and read the definition of what a narcissist is, it's in all of us. We are selfish, flawed humans and our heart is deceitful. So I think we have to take the idea of narcissism with a grain of salt because we're all selfish. So I find that quote interesting, that identity isn't tied to ego. It's our identity is more often based on our thoughts, right, wrong, or indifferent, of other people's perceptions of us.
Okay, this is perfect.
And that's how the framework where we create our identity.
It's like we planned this, Brandon. Nice, because
We have not talked about this.
I know, because let me give you the next quote.
Okay.
You masterfully transitioned into that.
Thank
you didn't
you.
even know it. So
Thank you.
great job. You must be a communicator speaker. All right, here's the next one. Insecurity is usually the fruit of comparison, and comparison is usually the fruit of rejection. So let me read that again, because you just brought that up. You transitioned over and you're talking about us comparing ourselves. Right? Insecurity is usually the fruit of comparison, and comparison is usually the fruit of rejection. So when we're insecure in our identity, it's usually because we're comparing ourselves to someone else. And that comparison usually comes from we were rejected for some reason.
Yeah. The comparison is the thief of joy. And, there's all those Hobby Lobby plaques about, those quotes.
Yeah.
Live, laugh, love.
Yep.
Yes. The comparison game, I think that is one of the biggest threats to society today. We see it, at our young kids' sporting events. The parents are more competitive than the kids on the field.
Yeah.
Like the parents care more. We go to family events and Christmas, and it's not so much about the gifts anymore. We now compete on the wrapping, the gift wrapping.
Yeah.
Who did it? Everything is competitive when it comes to comparison. The thing I find with comparison, it does one of two things. It either elevates us to a place of pride where we think we've arrived, and now it's impacting that ego, or two, it creates anxiety, depression, and lowers us to this place of woe is me, I'm not good enough. And now we have a whole nother conversation of mental illness and the way we view ourselves, and we're looking for other ways to fulfill that void inside of us. And if we can just be in the present, we're going full circle here. If we can just be in the present and the now and eliminate the comparison game.
You brought up a really good point that comparison is going to do one of two things. If you win and you outdid everyone else and you compare yourself, now it's elevating you and it becomes ego, narcissism. If it's the other way, then it's going toward discouragement and depression, but we're flooded with it more than maybe ever in human history. Some of it because of social media. And like we said, social media is not all bad, but it's certainly not helping with the comparison issue.
And I'm going to make a shameless plug here. In the last year, my wife and I, we wrote a children's book called Happy as a Hippo.
Yeah. And
it really came from the idea when everything in the news and the media in the summer of 2022 was transgenderism in children, kids, not being happy with who they are. Well, they just go change your identity, change who you are, change your name, birth this idea. And so we wrote a children's book about this hippopotamus who has everything they need to be happy: a great family, a warm home, food, amazing pond in their yard. And then the hippo one day decides, hey, if I have stripes like the zebra, then I'll finally be happy. And so in the children's book, paint stripes all over this, this big, round hippo with paint dripping off it, and realizes that even with the stripes, still not happy. And if I was as smart as the elephant, I'd be happy. So goes to school. Or if I was as fast as the cheetah, and, all these comical sketches of a hippo out on a track running, trying to get faster. If I was as tall as the giraffe, and all these different, and in the end realized that happiness was a choice, and that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, and God's got a plan for me, and I'm happy as a hippo.
Yeah.
Because I'm in my 40s struggling with this, trying to learn it. And my kids are in their teens struggling with it. And if we can just help kids at a young age figure out you're fearfully and wonderfully made, avoid the comparison game at an early age, I think it's going to set them up for a lot better life than you or I have experienced.
Without a doubt. And it's so funny you say that, because I'm 52. I turned 53 this year. And I still find myself the hippo that's going like, man, if I could be as fast as the cheetah, if I could have the stripes of the zebra. So, by the way, let me plug that book too then. Like, you guys got to go out. We'll put it in the description below as well.
No, thank you.
Happy as a hippo. That's a great, but let me just jump in really quick. Can you imagine, Brandon, if a child did actually grow up, and they're graduating from high school, and almost perfectly, they had that idea of like, "I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I am unique. I'm the pinnacle. I'm the
Mhm.
heights, not the low, because of God made me. That I'm unlike any other human being. That my worth is not found." Can you imagine an 18-year-old who had that in the core of their being, how healthy they would be?
I would hire them today.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And my daughter would marry him,
Yeah,
you
for
know?
sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
It's one of those things I find myself thinking about in the, in the sauna or the walk in the desert of like, it's so much bigger. Like, and I understand now, like, I wish I would have paid attention in high school to these conversations about philosophers and this is modern day philosophy. Like we're trying to figure out,
Mhm,
what is the meaning of life?
mhm.
I can tell you it's not comparison. It's not to achieve. It's not to get what, the Joneses have
Yeah.
and I found myself just in the last 24 hours, my in-laws got a new vehicle and all of a sudden my vehicle isn't good enough anymore. They have
Yes.
a new
Yeah.
Lexus and my Tahoe.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I
yeah.
got it's
It's
time to
not a
trade that in.
comparison.
But I found myself last night scrolling on Lexus's website looking at
Yeah,
this vehicle
yeah,
because mine's not good enough.
yep. So here's another quote. Make a comment about this one. "There's a big difference between being well known and being known well." There's a big difference between being well known and being known well.
Yes, that's deep. From a humanistic point of view or even from a spiritual point of view.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's one of the things that your therapist was trying to, when the Tarzan example,
yeah.
that was trying to get you to understand, right? Like, as soon as someone was getting to know you well, and I know this because I'm a 3 as well, and again, I think all of us as human beings, um, it's difficult for us to allow ourselves to be well known, because if someone knows us really well, they're gonna know all of our brokenness,
Mhm.
and that's difficult
And
for
what
us.
if we're no longer lovable?
Yeah, what if we're not enough?
What if we're not good enough
Yeah,
once they see that we have some
yeah.
scars?
I remember one time I was, speaking on a stage, and there's quite a few people in that audience on that particular one, and I said, um, "Here's one thing I know about this group in here. Every single one of you came in here with a secret that maybe you've never told anybody else. You were wounded so deeply, you were hurt so deeply, someone did something or said something you said you've never shared with anybody else." And this was actually at a church, by the way, where we're supposed to be able to be honest and transparent. And that's again where I think that the danger for us as humans is we want to be well known,
Mhm.
but we don't want to be known well. Big difference.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, 3 more. These are very
'Kay.
similar, so I'm gonna read all 3 of them. But this really comes back to you and I being men of faith. We work from acceptance by God, not for acceptance by God. That's a huge one with identity, that if it's wrong, but most of us spend our life working from acceptance by God, not for acceptance by God, meaning we're striving to try to make God accept us
Yep.
when God is saying, "I already do, based on what I did on the cross." Here's another one similar to that one. We become hostages to others, especially our critics, if we are more concerned with what people say and think about us than what God thinks and says about us. And that's for threes. That's a big one, right? And then the last one, then I want you to comment on these. Too often we have more faith in the people who don't believe in us than the God who made us.
Yeah. I like to call it critics math. You know, you you can be on stage, you can speak, you can write a children's book and get 100 positive reviews. People singing your praises, people want to meet you after you step off stage and shake your hand or take a picture. And then you see that one negative review, and guess what consumes me for the next week, week and a half?
Yep.
The one negative.
Yep.
Truthfully, Pat, I don't know how many years ago, 5, 6 years ago, I had a speaking engagement, and one of my critics who saw on my website where I was going to be reached out to the event planner, an event I was going to come to, and sent an email just destroying me and who I am and my credibility and calling me a liar. And that the event that was bringing me in actually forwarded me the email and said, "Hey, we received this." And in that moment, I realized it's really hard to defend yourself and not be defensive, not come across as defensive. And the email, I did the event, the email was ridiculous and completely out of line and wrong. I still have that email on my computer in a folder. I can't delete it, but I go back to it and I read it once or twice a year. And when I do, it just makes me sick and nauseous and ruins my day. And I know if I just delete it, it's gone. But there's something about, that second quote you just read, like
Yeah. Yeah, I get
our
that.
critics take up so much rent in our head.
Brandon, you were telling that story and I'm sitting here going, I'm thinking like, Brandon, that's really unhealthy. And then I turn it back on myself and I go, oh, there was a place that fired me a few years ago and I keep going to their website to see how they're not doing very well.
Yeah.
Meaning, like when I say not doing very well, like as long as they don't achieve something, I'm like going, oh, good. See, it proves that you made the wrong decision.
Yeah. Just imagine where they'd
which
be.
is really unhealthy.
Where would they be if you were still there?
Yes, which is really unhealthy.
Right.
So let's make a deal. How about you go delete that and I won't go back to that site again. That's going to be a big one for me. I'm down to only looking at it like once every 3 months or something.
But why do we do that?
We'll talk offline. Offline.
Yeah, I'm not committing to it, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to either.
But why do we do that?
Yeah.
Like I just told you they were wrong. It was ridiculous. These accusations weren't factual. It's not even hearsay. But I still have that thread because what if I do need it in the future? What if, to destroy their credibility?
Mm-hmm. Goes back to the critics' math that you said. I like that. I wrote that down.
Read number 1 again of those last 3.
We work from acceptance by God, not for acceptance by God.
I think we could do a whole nother podcast on that one right there. Because I think that impacts some of our theology and our perception of God.
Absolutely.
And that's a whole nother journey I'm on, growing up in a small conservative Christian community school, that I grew up with this fear of God that if I do something wrong, I'm going to upset God.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm on this place of, before the foundations of the earth, God called me, chose me, loved me, sent his son for me. I'm good enough. Yeah. And there's a whole lot of crazy theology in between those two that we could discuss.
Huge. But we could spend a whole podcast. Because I spent most of my life too. God was up there with his arms crossed, looking down, just waiting for me to screw up so he could punish me. Yeah. Instead of the God that has open arms, just waiting for me to run home is his son. Yeah. It's completely different theology and a completely different way that we live out our life then, based on those two, right? Yeah. Well, Brandon, before we wrap up here, anything else you want to say when we talk? I mean, this was we could go on and on with this, but anything else you wanted to say? As we're wrapping up this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment on something you'll take away. All right, let's hop back into the remainder of the episode. Anything else you wanted to say?
Oh, I think we covered it to some degree. I don't know if it was well, but here I am as a 3. I want to make sure it was good enough and measured up, and we checked all the boxes and got it covered. Yeah. No, identity is, I so bad want to arrive, want to get there. Because that's how life works. You don't get from A to Z without taking steps forward. And so identity, value, perception, reality is a constant struggle of mine. But one thing I do know is Brandon Smith of 2024 is a much healthier version because of conversations like this, trying to figure out self-reflection and influences from people like yourself that, regardless of the missed shots or the failures or the broken relationships, stand by somebody because they believe in them and can see past the scars. Yeah. So,
and that's a key thing that you just said. The Brandon of 2024 is healthier than that's how I want to keep living my life. I believe that's true of me today. But 2 years from now, I want to be able to say that again, or 4 years from now, I want to say that again. So always growing, always learning. Right. Well, okay. So here's the fun, ironic part of our podcast: 2 truths and a lie.
Mm-hmm. No gray areas.
No gray areas. Will you lie to me?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's no way you can stump me, Brandon. I've known you since you were 4 or 5 years old.
Okay.
There's no way.
All right. Here we go. Number 1, I once played basketball against Tracy McGrady.
Okay.
Number 2, I auditioned for season 3 of The Apprentice. Number 3, I performed as an NBA mascot.
I know you performed as a mascot. I just don't remember if it was for the NBA. But I know you did that before. Weren't you Monty for a little while?
I'm helping you here. I did one time. I was clutch with the Houston Rockets.
Okay.
Well done.
I was going to go true on that one. And then I'm gonna go. So one was you played against Tracy McGrady, and then what was number 2?
Auditioned for season 3 of The Apprentice.
I'm gonna say 2 is true as well.
Dang, you are good.
Yes!
I have not played against Tracy McGrady.
Yes. Those are good ones,
Wow.
though.
I had to work really hard.
Yeah.
that.
No, but I think that part of the reason I would have picked number 2 is I could see you doing that too. I could see you doing all 3 of those, but number 2, I could definitely see you.
Dang it. I thought I had you. Well done. Well
I'm
done.
on a roll.
Well done.
Well, Brandon, thank you so much, man. It has been a joy to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for your transparency. I hope our audience will really take to heart some things. One of the big things that I would encourage them to do that I'm going to take from what you said is to be very proactive in our calendars.
Yeah.
Our calendars say what we really believe and are living, not what we say we believe. And so be proactive on your calendar and make sure that whatever your calendar says you're doing reflects on your core beliefs.
Yeah, is what's
and
in your
values.
calendar getting you closer to those goals, those dreams, those desires. One last thing, Pat, I love to ask audiences, hey, real quickly, write down the first 3 to 5 things that come to mind when I ask you the question, what's most important to you? And step back and give them 30 seconds. And then I know what they're writing down. And I know what they're not writing down. And so I'm setting up for this conversation about, being present. It's our family, our spouse, our children, our faith, our career. It's not our cell phone, Netflix, golfing. It's not. And
so look at your
so
calendar.
look at your calendar and see
yeah.
do the 2 match. And when you see your calendar is full of appointments and conversations that are taking you away, I mean, there's so many layers to it. Do the notifications you get on your phone move you closer to your goal and dream? Or are they distracting you and taking you off course?
Yeah.
Live intentionally.
See, and that's perfect because that's way to wrap it up again, Brandon. Power and complexity of human choice. You have a choice on your calendar. You have a choice on what you're going to choose to do with your calendar in the next 7, 14, 21, 30 days.
And it's hard.
That.
If you're a people pleaser, it's hard to say no to appointments, to requests, to...
Oh, my goodness. Okay, we got
episode 2. Here we go.
This could be episode 2 because I have gotten so much better at saying no, and I used to be terrible at that because it was all I didn't want to make someone unhappy with me because it went back to my identity. I've gotten a lot better at saying
my assistant tells people no for me.
That's the way I
struggle with it.
That's the way to do it. Yeah, find something that works for you on that. But we have some listeners that are going, I have no problem saying that. All right. Well, thanks, Brandon.
Awesome,
Appreciate
man. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of No Gray Areas featuring Brandon Smith. For more interview and podcast content, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And stay tuned for new podcast drops every other Wednesday. See you next time.